Good evening and welcome to the ACT branch of the Australian Institute of International Affairs. We turn tonight to one of the most dynamic and intriguing regions in the Middle East. The United Arab Emirates is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, and our speaker, His Excellency, the UAE Ambassador to Australia, will provide us an informed perspective on his country's achievements, relations with Australia, and the UAE's regional and international outlook. And indeed, it will be particularly interesting to hear the ambassador's views on the reshuffling of relations in the Middle East as regional powers, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, and Egypt recalibrate their foreign policies. The United States and Russia appear to be renewing their rivalry in the region, and China is entering as a new competitor. But what part is the UAE playing in this shifting of alliances? We look forward to hearing. We're pleased and honoured that Ambassador Abdullah Al-Sabusi is able to join us this evening. The Ambassador has a distinguished career in the UAE Foreign Service, including senior attachments in the UAE Embassy in Washington and to the United Nations in New York. Earlier in the UAE Foreign Ministry, he was chief of the European Union desk and was involved in EU Gulf Cooperation Council free trade negotiations. Before taking up his appointment in Canberra in May 2019, he was Consul General in Los Angeles. And since arriving in Australia, I think it's fair to say the ambassador has been a busy man, including overseeing the UAE's donation of fire trucks and generators to communities in Southeast Australia affected by the January 2020 bushfires. Now, just before we start, some housekeeping notes. The ambassador will speak for 20 minutes or so before he takes questions, which I will curate from those you submit through the Q&A function on Zoom. Please keep your questions focused and do refrain from submitting long comment pieces. I will try to get through as many questions as possible before we finish at 7 p.m. So without any further ado, can I hand over the floor to Ambassador Al-Sabusi? Please, sir.
Thank you, Heath, for your introduction, the AIIA for hosting this event, and all of you for taking the time to listen to me today. I have to profess my appreciation for the role that the Australian Institute for International Affairs in the field of, talking about these very important issues, which I think is very important for the future of this nation. Allow me to start first by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the custodians of the land which we speak on, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I got to appreciate this welcome of country, which shows a lot of respect, a lot of admiration, to be admired, I meant to say. I moved to Canberra about 2.5 years ago, and happy to report that it has been very busy and challenging times, like you said. I mean, we had bushfires, and then the COVID-19 pandemic. And let me tell you that there is no other place I'd rather be aside from my own country, of course. You talked about the fire trucks, but I've seen firsthand the resilience of the Australian people in the face of some difficult circumstances, coming together as a country to face unprecedented difficulties. And I also was overwhelmed or heartened by how countries of the world, and UAE included, stood in solidarity with Australia during these difficult times. In many ways, this is a reflection for the desire to expand our already deep ties with Australia. We may come from different cultures, but I have found that Emiratis and Australians share many of the same values and aspiration. When it comes to things like stability, economic growth, pursuit of opportunity, good education and care for the environment. It is from these shared vision for a better future that new opportunities, I think, for cooperation emerge, which bring us even closer together, I hope. The first, part of my job, I think, is doing things like this, like the event today, speaking about my country and having a genuine dialogue with you over a conversation over the bilateral, not just bilateral relationship, but how we see our future come together. I truly love this country, and it stands no reason that I love nothing more about talking about the UAE and trying to connect us more and more with Australia. My own, Heath, I have to tell you this, my own appreciation for Australia probably started with many hours of the Flying Doctors TV series that I used to, I don't know if you remember that show. I think Andrew McFarlane, I think, started Dr. Tom Gallagher, and the show was set against the backdrop of the awesomely isolated Australian outback. And there was this sort of small friendly town, characters that, I think now I found out that Australian shows are famous for. But imagine my surprise when I got here to discover they were real. And in fact, they are doing wonderful work helping in the vaccination efforts. But it's not the foundation of my knowledge of Australia. My fascination with Australia stayed with me through adulthood in my career as a diplomat. You mentioned that for a period of 3 years, I think I was head of our Americas and Pacific department. And we handled the political relations with Australia. And this gave me the opportunities to come here many times to this beautiful country. And of course, this brings me to the main subject of the talk, which is the fact that we celebrate this year, like you said, you mentioned 50 years of the creation of the United Arab Emirates, which is really the only federation in the region. Although my country is much younger, we were founded in 1971, but the founder and first president, His Highness Sheikh Zayed, acted in a similar manner to his founding and the other founding fathers of the Union acted in the same manner of the founders of the Commonwealth of Australia. Sheikh Zayed understood the importance of collaboration and consensus. He also understood that by providing for the needs of the people through education, healthcare, economic opportunity, for example, the UAE would be able to flourish and become the regional success story that it is today. Along those lines, I'd like to reflect a little bit about the past 50 years before talking about the projects for the 50 next years. Much like the unification of the 1901, of the different Australian colonies, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, and Western Australia, and of course, the Northern Territory. It was clear that to Sheikh Zayed that strength is founded in numbers, and it was better to unify the Emirates into one federation. The Emirates we hear the most about, of course, are Abu Dhabi, the capital of the country and its largest city-state, also as well as Dubai, the second largest emirate and the most populous. Speaking, it wasn't always having this oil wealth, for example, which comes first comes to mind when you think about the UAE and the Gulf state. It wasn't associated with the UAE. In fact, many don't know that the country history, but a long time ago, the UAE economy was dependent on a local pearl diving industry. My mother, for example, comes from a long line of pearl divers. And if you go to Ras Al Khaimah today, which is another semi-independent city-state, part of the union, you'll see the Pearl Museum. Sometimes there is, I think the last surviving pearl diver, he's more than 70 years old. And he maybe you're lucky, he will take you in a pearl diving tour. But, local divers will collect pearls from the shallow waters of the Gulf and would then sell them to jewelry manufacturers and off to buyers in Europe and US. The practice sustained the country economy for some time until 1940s, when innovation in another country further east squeezed the UAE out of this market. Japan's cultured pearl farms could produce around 10 million pearls per year, not only at a lower price, but at a more consistent shape and color. And the UAE economy collapsed. As late as the 1960s, the Emirates that compromised what we know now as the UAE were amongst the least developed nations on earth. With one school, no medical clinics, no paved roads, and no telephones. This all changed, of course, with the discovery of oil in 1960s, and the rest is, as they say, is history. The progress we've made is hard even for me, a native Emirati, to believe, and the changes accelerate day by day. For example, I'll give you this. The village where I was born in a small oasis called Suhan. A quiet place with a few farms here and a source of water and people depending on herding and stuff like that. And now when I go back, I have to triple check that I'm in the right place. The village is rightly called a town with its own hospital, first, fire station, strip mall, also, close to 1,000 flourishing farms. Not only that, but it proudly hosts, and you can see it on Google Maps, one of the world's biggest solar PV plants. Not only that, but the cost per kilowatt is 2.94 cents, which is the lowest ever cost around the world you can find. The plant can generate sufficient power to meet the needs of approximately 195,000 homes, and is expected to offset approximately 7 million tons of carbon emissions per year. I don't want to leave the pearl story without saying, on a historical side note, for those of you who are interested, the UAE today exports more oil to Japan than any other country. So we no longer have any hard feelings about what the Japanese did to our pearl industry. When the UAE was developing its roads and power plants in the 70s, 80s, it's also focused on improving social infrastructure. We began building schools, universities, hospitals, and clinics. And what better example to turn to than Australia, for example. We have collaborated together in all of these areas. And many Australians came as engineers, teachers, professors, company executives, and helped us overcome and become what we have become. And this is continuous, there is Australian universities, campuses in the UAE, Wollongong and Murdoch, the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, which is Masdar, is working with an Australian company, Tribe, on waste to energy projects across Australia. And but the vision behind all of these projects stem from the UAE legacy of investing in its people. Sheikh Zayed once said, the real asset of any advanced nation is its people. This statement rings true through the country and forms the foundation on which the UAE is founded. We have worked hard to build our country as a model of peace, stability, tolerance, and opportunity. In addition to our progress in education, healthcare, investment, in women has always been a natural priority for the UAE. We cannot forget that the women make up the cornerstone of any society, especially in a country as small as the UAE. The ways of their impact and hard work are felt throughout our nation. And it's very hard to fathom for a Western audience, because, there is this stereotypical idea about women. But I'm happy to report that the UAE women fill 2/3 of all public sector posts, 30% of which are decision-making positions, 50% of the UAE Federal National Council, which is our parliamentary body, is comprised of females. This is the largest participation of women outside of Themocracy. And there are also many Emirati women ambassadors, and many, I think half of the Foreign Affairs Ministry workforce is female. We have women serving their country as fighter pilots, and the UAE Air Force and others, training to be interpreters of Islamic law. They are a true force of nature. In fact, my boss, the Assistant Minister for Political Foreign Affairs for Political Affairs, is a female. Her boss also is a Minister of State for International Cooperation, is a female. Another capable female. But, I want to talk about the next 50 years. Fact, the UAE stands as the second largest economy in the Arab world, third largest in the larger Middle East, which is no small feat for considering we are only 50 years old with a 10 million people population. This change and progress was the result of hard work, optimism, and dedicated leadership with a clear vision. It is no coincidence that these are principles we share with my second home, Australia. So with that settled, I think the world is on the edge. It seems like it's on the edge of undergoing one of the largest economic transformation in its history, with the move to a clean energy future. We hear this is the main topic now with the Galaxo, with the COP26, and on a sign of this shift. Just last week, we officially adopted the net zero by 2050 climate targets. At the same time, the UAE is approaching its golden jubilee. And this, the impact, alongside with the impact, we're undergoing an economic transformation from energy export to into, like I said, into a knowledge-based economy. Here comes COVID-19 impact and the challenges, challenging political situation everywhere. All this is going to have a massive impact on not just the Middle East, but I think everywhere. And to meet these challenges, global economic order, our government has embarked on a new phase in its history and new cycle of economic, political, and social growth that will help the UAE economic recovery following COVID-19 pandemic. I think the main overlooked, you can read about this, but I think before we announced these projects, we put 10 economic principles to guide us to the next 50 years. And it's overwhelming, Heath, to go through, to take a closer look at these principles, because they will shape our way forward. They just been issued as a law, and basically a law that stipulates direction for all ministries, federal and local governments, agencies, bodies in the country, to abide by these principles and be guided by them. And the 10 principles are reinforcement. I think they also ring a bell to anywhere in the world. It pushes our institutions to strengthen the foundation of our union, build a sustainable economy, harness all resources for a more prosperous society, and develop regional and international relations to achieve and support the higher interests of the state or the UAE. There should be a foundation for peace and stability in the world, or our approach to the world. And the first principle, I think also, I don't know, maybe you know more about this in the example of Australia, but the main priority will remain strengthening our union in terms of institutions, legislation, powers, budget, and developing all the country's urban development and economic regions, which is the fastest and most effective way to consolidate the union of the Emirates. And the reason I mentioned, I think this is also a discussion in Australia also, now with the closing the borders and such. But historically, maybe you can, to focus completely during the second principle is to focus completely on the coming period on building the best and most active economy in the world. So the economic development of the state of the UAE is the supreme national interest. And all the state institutions in all their competencies and through the federal and local levels, they have to be responsible for building the best global economic environment and maintaining the gains made over the past 50 years. The third principle is the foreign policy of the United Arab Emirates. Should be used to serve the higher national goals, and foremost of which are the economic interests of the UAE. The goal of politics is to serve the economy, and the goal of the economy is to provide for a better life for the people of the Emirates. And the fourth principle, the main driver of the future growth, is human capital. So developing education, attracting talent, retaining specialists, and building skills, to preserve the sovereignty of the UAE. The fifth principle is very important because it urges us to maintain good neighborliness, with on the basis of stability. Geographical, cultural environment in which we live in is our first line of defense for our security, for our safety, for not only that, but for our future development. Stable and positive political, economic developments and relations with this environment are among the most important priorities for our country's foreign policy. And, the sixth principle is consolidating the global reputation of the UAE and its national mission for all of its institutions. The seventh principle, which relates very much into Australia, the digital and technical and scientific superiority of where we need to see our economy, will determine the developments of our relations and consolidation of all its capital of talent and companies and investments, and relations with being a global partner with countries such as Australia. The eighth principle is we need to also have an open, and tolerant, preserving the rights and the consolidation of the UAE justice system, the preservation of human dignity, respect for culture, consideration of human respect and fraternity. All these principles are very important. The ninth principle, which relates to our humanitarian, I don't know if you know this, the fact is the UAE per capita is the largest donor country in the world. And the UAE foreign humanitarian aid is an integral part of our path. And it's not only that, but our future path and also moral obligation toward less fortunate and our also friends in need. So it should not be linked to religion, race, color, or culture. And if we have a political dispute with anybody, it shouldn't be factored in. We should still help others we disagree with in cases of disaster, emergencies, and crisis. And the 10th principle is calling for peace and security and negotiation dialogue to resolve all differences. But these principles commit the UAE to building the best and most dynamic economy in the world, and committing to digital, technological, and scientific excellence, developing its human capital and everything related to that. We're planning to further strengthen our economic relations with our partners, and this is very particular to Australia also, by increasing our trade by 10% annually. It's called 10 by 10. And it's very ambitious in the next 10 years. Our economic plan offer investment opportunities and help us attract billions of foreign direct investment in the next decade through signing trade and investment agreements with the top world of economies in the next 10 years. And we've been talking to Australia about this. We are making a historic investment into our manufacturing sector to take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution by adopting the most advanced technologies into the sectors. We are investing in digital economy, creating program startups, initiatives, and encouraging entrepreneurship initiatives by 2025. Another thing that everybody is reading about is we have overhauled our visa system to encourage the influx of the world's best and brightest to take residence in the UAE, as well as adopting a new data law, which is very revolutionary. It's in partnership with the major technology companies, you name it, all the big companies, which is designed to give individuals freedoms to control the way their personal information is used. All these economic initiatives are expected to create opportunities for our international partners, including Australian businesses and skilled workers, for greater partnerships with the UAE. I can demonstrate, I know time is pressing, I've spoken a lot, but I can go back and talk about a little bit. We'll see what questions they have in regard to this. But back to you, I guess.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. I think that gives us a good foundation for some more discussion this evening. And I noticed that a few questions are coming in about some topics, and that's great. But let me take chair's privilege and ask the first one. Just, you mentioned earlier about the importance to the UAE's development of energy and these days cheap energy. Could I ask about the Baraka nuclear power plant, which is, I understand, the first nuclear power station in the Arabian Peninsula and the first nuclear commercial power station in the Arab world, as I understand it.
Yes.
Could I ask in particular, what's the UAE's plans for energy supply and nuclear power in the Gulf region, and access to nuclear energy by other GCC states? Yeah. And also, what's the UAE's views on Iran and use of nuclear power for civilian purposes in that country? Please.
I think, the UAE made the strategic decision about 15 years ago to embrace, mitigating climate change and as part of its economic growth and diversification strategy. This has led, like you said, or I mentioned also, to major investments in renewable energy. And we envisioned our energy demands will be met by having a combination of a third reliant on nuclear power and natural gas, and of course renewable energy, which I spoke a little bit about. I think our peaceful nuclear program set the gold standard for how a country should go about acquiring nuclear energy. And that's basically what we need in any area of contention. We need to set the right example. We need a positive message out there. If you are serious about doing this peacefully, this is what you need to do. And it's a clear-cut process. These plants, the Baraka plants, are I think third generation, very safe, and they will feed in, like you mentioned, the GCC. They'll feed in the larger grid. I think they will bring as demand grow and our economy grows with which I spoke before about manufacturing. It will be very important to add this component into the larger question of renewable energy. I'm sure with more advancement, this discussion will grow. I know there was a discussion in Australia, maybe you know better than this, more about this, and it was right. It wasn't, I think, it wasn't.
Well, the nuclear power issue has been around for quite a while in Australia, and perhaps we'll come back for more discussion as time goes on.
And this was a big part of the submarine. The nuclear powered submarine discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's what a country like the UAE can do. I think they can lead by example by showing all these positive images or best practice or how to go about doing things. I think we can succeed in.
Well, thanks, Ambassador El-Sabouzi. You mentioned earlier about taking the emissions targets to Glasgow, and indeed there's a few questions on the climate policies of UAE. And one question from Alex Dolan in particular: what industry or taxation policies are in place in UAE to achieve those targets? And what do you think Australia can learn from the UAE experience in that industry and tax area?
I think there is a big learning curve for everyone when it comes to mitigating what we should do as far as climate action and mitigating this with the economic growth and diversification strategy. It's very difficult for a lot of countries, and it's a hot topic of debate. But we think, by investing in renewable energy, followed by mandatory building standards, climate smart agriculture projects, nature-based solution, including planting mangroves. There is a mangrove, I discovered a mangrove area near Canberra, near Bateman Bay. It's very beautiful. I encourage those who are in Canberra to go and visit.
All right.
But these kind of things, I think, are very important. And by the way, we are bidding to host COP28. And I think this will help also reshape how we see this, our approach, and enhance also international cooperation in this domain.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Ambassador. There have been a number of questions inevitably about the COVID pandemic and UAE's place in all of that. And I noted that the UAE has very high vaccination rates, amongst the highest in the world, in fact, in percentage terms, something like 92.4%, I've read, of your entire population's received the first jab.
Yes.
So could I ask on behalf of a couple of questioners tonight, what's the impact of how does the UAE approach the vaccination rates policy, and indeed on looking at border issues in the UAE as far as visitors go, and particularly the tourist industry? How does the UAE tourist industry adjust with the border issues?
I think the latest numbers put us at 95.5%.
Okay, all right, okay, very good.
For first dosers, and I think 85.2 for double dose.
All right.
I've took back in December, I think I took my first vaccine, and I'm happy to report also that I took Pfizer here also in Australia. So I'm quadruple vaccinated.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yes. Like you.
But I think it's rapidly available here in Australia, and I have to tell you, I was astonished how fast things are going. First of all, there was a little bit of sluggishness, but now it's amazing how things have progressed, and it seems like we are hitting a milestone every 2 weeks. But I think for the UAE, it was very important a test for all the investment we made in health sector, and how we want to, how we face crises, and especially that if you consider that the UAE economy is dependent on aerospace movement and being a hub, trading hub, and tourist hub. And so, of course, it's hit hard. And I don't think that the impact that COVID-19 had on the countries of the world is seen yet. I think it's going to manifest itself more predominantly as time goes in, we'll see. That's why we need to really work from, we need to start working. That's why the emphasis of the projects in the 50 took into account the need to hit the ground running post-COVID time. So through investment in our healthcare service, let me note our appreciation for the role a company, an Australian company played, Aspen, who provided, the largest, for the testing clinics and the different vaccination also hubs. And it's an Australian company, and it did very wonderful work in the UAE, one of the areas we have been cooperating in. And I think we've invested in vaccine development, and we've been using that vaccine based off Sinopharm vaccine. And remember our humanitarian role. We sent out PPEs and COVID-19 kits to as far as testing and stuff to over 130 countries, benefiting 1.5 million first responders. So that also is another component of how we handled the COVID-19 pandemic.
All right, well, thank you very much, Ambassador. We might turn to some regional issues, and one that's got a number of questions coming through is related indeed to Afghanistan. And I understand the UAE is one of the few countries that recognized the earlier Taliban government in the late 90s. But what is the UAE's position on the new Taliban leadership in Afghanistan? You mentioned that UAE has provided aid to a number of countries, and I think Afghanistan is also a recipient. What's the change in Afghanistan hold for UAE's concerns about extremism in the Islamic world, and whether Afghanistan might be a haven for terrorist groups?
I think we are still concerned with we're worried about what's going on. Of course, we're keeping an eye to see how things will develop. We're very concerned, just like our Australian counterpart. I'm proud of the efforts of the UAE in evicting, and helping the eviction of many Australians and those Afghanis who are holding, visas to Australia and such. And many in the larger context also, the role that our humanitarian city had hosted so many Afghanis. All of that is great, but like I said, we're still watching, keeping an eye on this progressing issue. I hope to see a smooth political transition. Maybe we hear a lot of positive things, to be honest with you. I'm just like you, but we have to see how things will progress, I think.
All right. Of course, Islam is the issue in a number of countries in the Arab world at the moment, whether you look at Lebanon, Tunisia, Libya, Algeria, and Yemen. Each of those countries facing a need for a more stable future, but each of them dealing with Islamist political parties or movements. What are the UAE expectations of Islamist groups looking at the continuing evolution of those countries, Ambassador? Is it a positive role or less than?
I think, of course, we are a proponent to political Islam. We have been always, we didn't see, I think what, if you want to deal with, like you said, the sources of extremism and violent extremism, you have to take a look at these groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood and others. You know, Al-Qaeda came from that, ISIS, all of these adopt the same kind of ideology. And I think it's very important to recognize that to mitigate all of these, I think the real way we can address these issues is to think about the question of stability. I think when you have a vacuum, you mentioned all these countries, if you have a vacuum, it just, you know, it stipulates that there will be a lot of trouble. A lot of organizations, groups will try to manipulate that or use this for their advancing their agenda. And that's why our broader focus, as I said in my speech, that de-escalation, also building trust, confidence building through meaningful negotiations and political processes. This applies in every hot area you mentioned. You know, what have happened over the last decade with the, you know, the Arab Spring and other critical issues around the Middle East only showed that that our region is ready for an evolution rather than a revolution. You know, stability is a main thing. Everything we do in the UAE, as one of my mentors and former boss, Dr. Anwar Gergash says, always maintain that, you know, that everything we do in the UAE is with the view towards stability in the region. Long-term stability, medium-term stability, because, you know, we feel that from past experience that in a region as diversified and at times intolerant, keyword, and difficult as the one we live in, the distraction and disasters that, you know, we have seen, the destruction, you know, we have seen around us is not, it can only breed more violent extremism, more trouble in the future. The second, you know, point or a different level, the need for these positive messages. That's why, for example, I don't know, we didn't speak about this, but, you know, this we sent a probe to Mars, and we are planning one to Venus. So no connection to men or women, but, you know, but this is to inspire youth, to have them think about the future, women empowerment, lunar trips, thinking about these, having aspire youth, how, you know, I think we have so many ministers who are younger than me, for example, you know, handling key like AI, minister for AI, the fact we have themed ministries around youth, artificial intelligence, tolerance, happiness, which, you know, all these, I think, address the idea of sending out positive messages, the need to focus entrepreneurship, empowering youth and women, you know. And in fact, there was a survey yesterday, I saw something where I think the Arab youth was surveyed, and they do this every year. And the UAE over time, you know, have took, you know, Arab youth mentioned that they want to live in the UAE, that they see opportunity because of all these positive messages, and they want to see what is happening in the UAE happen in the country. It's very hard to replicate Australian experience in our region. But when they see a country within their regions doing all these wonderful things, I think that's a positive impact. And the more we spread that sort of positive example, the better it is for everybody. We don't want to be really an isolated island, you know, in our region. That's why when I talked about the principle, we want to maintain this this openness. And the other thing that's very important here, and I think you'll appreciate this, the importance of respecting diversity in our region. You know, in the Middle East, we are not all Arabs. Like you mentioned Islam. In the Middle East, we're not all Muslims. And in reality, the Middle East is a tapestry of different ethnicities, different religions, different backgrounds. And that's what makes the Middle East thrive, I think. At least that's what made the UAE thrive, is acceptance, tolerance of all, having, you know, having synagogues, churches, of course, but, you know, temples, Buddhists, Hindus, this idea of the Abrahamic house, you know, the three monolithic religions in the capital, you know, one church, one mosque, celebrating 1,000-year-old relics of 1,000-year-old church, you know. I think Christian communities have, you know, who lived in our communities, you know, in the Middle East for the longest time. And there we see them fleeing now to Europe and coming to Australia and other places. I can't help but think that this will have a greater impact. It's a sad state of affairs, you know, of basically societies that these populations are an integral part of, and they had to leave. These are indigenous parts of our populations and our regions. And the UAE, in many things, you know, that we do very much about is trying to be a bearer of tolerance and diversity in our region. And another important issue, I think, related to this, because we are talking about the region itself, and is this idea of that we have too complicated, our problems are too complicated. And because they are too complicated, let's manage them rather than really solve them, you know. And this has always been pragmatic, I think, state of mind, and managing problems doesn't only create another set of whole, maybe worse problems as we've seen, but really, you know, we need to start solving these problems.
All right, thanks very much, Ambassador. You mentioned the diversity of the Middle East. And before we go away from regional relations, let me just ask you about Iran. I understand that the Iranian foreign minister visited a number of countries, Qatar, Iraq, Kuwait, and Oman earlier in the year on something like a charm offensive. Could I ask what the UAE can expect from closer ties with Iran?
We hope that, to be honest with you, we hope to see, like I said, de-escalation. Stability, like I said before, is very important to us. De-escalation in the region. We don't want to see confrontation. We believe that we should focus more on economic issues. We still have our concerns that everybody knows. We hashed them out before many times. But maybe we need to focus on de-escalation in the current and keep an open door, try to see, you know, there is the region, our region suffers from a zero-sum game, you know. There is a lot of believers in that, unfortunately. If I win, you lose. If you lose, I win, you know, or something like this. And this is also, it's not helpful. and it's not going to solve these current crises. And that's very much a failure of diplomacy. And we don't want to see that. We want to see diplomacy right and center to trying to take, solving things everywhere needed, in Yemen and Libya and Syria, all the countries you've mentioned. We want to see diplomacy take a prominent role because the alternative will be very very bad. Basic 101 negotiations. You can't put your maximum demands and you'll put and I will put my maximum demands, and the result is we get into this fight that will continue for many years, and realize that we should have done something about it if anything, for the sake of our people.
Thank you very much. We've got a question from Anna about the bilateral relations with Australia. How do you see Australia and the UAE developing further collaboration in higher education? And what are the benefits that both sides can get in higher education in particular?
I have to say first about, highlight that when we talk about our bilateral relations, that the UAE is Australia's largest trading partner in the whole Middle East and North Africa. And we have been taking that position for nearly a decade now. We host over 300 Australian companies, 20,000 Australians living and working in the UAE. And, a large investor, we have been always a large investor in Australia. I mentioned the two campuses. I think there are 3 campuses, universities in the UAE, Murdoch, Curtin, and I think Winnergan. And we had, before the pandemic, we had many students studying here. And I think it will even grow more and more as we progress. Tihan, like I said, Dan Tihan, the Minister for Trade, had a visit in October. He opened the pavilion, Australian Pavilion and Expo 2020, which I haven't spoken. I should speak about a little bit.
Yes, you should. Yes. Take the floor. Where is the Dubai Expo at the moment?
It's going to be in Dubai. It's now from October 1st. It opened until we had 400,000 visitors so far. And it's going to stay open until next March, end of next March. So I think there will be a lot of opportunities for Australians to visit. 190 for the first time, 190 countries have pavilions. Wonderful themes of collaboration, innovation, inspiring people, about delivering real life solutions to real life challenges. They will be talking in the general themes about the challenges we just spoke about in climate change, equal access to education and healthcare, and bridging the digital divide between the haves and have-nots. And we hope that all attendees share in our commitments to building cleaner, safer, healthier future for everyone. I really hope that you can make it.
Well, Excellency, I think that's a fine place to draw a line under our conversation this evening. You've taken us through the bilateral relations with Australia and given us an understanding of the principles that guide UAE's outlook on the region and the world. So we thank you very much for your contribution tonight. And we do hope that we can see you at future meetings of the ACT branch or the AIIA, and especially in person when we get together, hopefully in the near future at some of our meetings.
I look forward to it.
Thank you so much. Now, before everyone disappears, let me just say that We have another event coming, which will be a top-class event on the 2nd of November, when we will hear from Professor John Blaxland from the ANU Strategic and Defence Studies Centre. He'll be talking on AUKUS. So what? So details are available on our website, so please register as soon as you can. So until we meet again, thank you to the Ambassador and for all participants tonight, and stay safe and well. Good night all.
Thank you. Good night.